Hey, what's up? Azu here and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at how to create a dynamic gun with a procedural muzzle flash, simulated bullet shells, and even a little rig for our weapon. So let's go and take a look at what we're going to be creating. Wait a minute, that's not how I usually start my tutorials. Anyway, let's take a look at some examples of how this is set up. Now, before I start this tutorial, I do have to warn you that there will be flashing lights and objects. So if you do have a history of epilepsy, viewer discretion is advised. Now, if we look at this first example, we have an Uzi with nice muzzle flashes and bullet shells flying everywhere. And if I rotate the gun, you can see how the bullet shells fly off with the gun, and they can even hit the gun itself. Yeah, they bounce off the gun. Now, if you're wondering what the use case of this would be, you could use this for your short animation films in Blender, but you could also use it for visual effects. Considering everything is three-dimensional, we have the luxury of positioning these muzzle flashes however we want. Remember about like 10 years ago or so when people used to make bullet freeze frame effects in After Effects? Yeah, they used to be big. But back then people were using 2D elements from Action Essentials and they would composite it and 3D track their scenes. But you know, now we have all these resources like Blender and whatnot. If you do use this for visual effects, don't be stupid and make sure you use a BB gun or an airsoft weapon. Make sure everybody on set knows, because accidents can happen. So let's take another example. This one is with a minigun and a bit more chaotic. So for this one, I have a whole bunch of bullets just flying out of it. And I animated this belt of bullets using an array modifier following a path. All right, so let's go ahead and see how this whole thing was set up. By the way, all these models were downloaded from sketchfab.com for free. I didn't have any gun models laying around, so I figured let me just use one from Sketchfab. So here we go. I have my Uzi weapon and one bullet shell, and they should have textures on them. The gun itself didn't initially have the gold bits around, but I basically opened up the shader editor and changed some of the stuff. So I already divided the weapon model into several bits because the model may either be merged into one mesh or in a lot of different pieces. So I just merged a bunch of them and I separated the trigger, the charging handle, stuff like that. So let's first create our armature, our rig for the weapon. And it's always a good practice to animate using a rig. So my model is perfectly in the middle of my 3D cursor. So I'm gonna create a single bone. And let's see, it's going to be my root, and name your bones. You can do this so you can see it. It's the root. I need one for the trigger. Call this trigger. And one for the slider or charging handle, or however you want to call it. Okay. The exact position of the charging handle doesn't really matter because it's going to move in the y-axis. The root is pretty important. I wanted to move around, I guess, this point. That's nice. And the trigger also actually matters, so I'm gonna put it at the 3D cursor there, like that. Make sure it also aligns from the front. Perfect. So now I'm going to select, like I said, already separated the model, so I'm just gonna select the model, shift click the armature, go into pose mode, like that. Select the bone that I made for it, and then Control P, Or I put it in my quick favorites with Control P and then boom, there you go. Do the same for the trigger and same for the body, for the root. And one more thing, in your armature, make sure your two bones that we created are parented to the root. So Control P, keep offset. There you go. So if I move this, we'll move the rest. See? Okay, since we're here in the armature, let's do everything that we need to do on this side and then move on. So first of all, the trigger should just be pulled as the weapon is firing. The slider has to animate as well. So let's set a keyframe, location, and I go forward 2 frames or 1 frame, depends. And I move this back, keyframe, go back forward. Let's copy this, Shift D, there you go. So, okay, I'm satisfied with that. But what's important is you have to select all of your keyframes, hit Shift E, and then make cyclic F modifier. This will now loop this animation. And if you want to modify, just move one of the keyframes. And it will keep looping, yeah, so that's all fine. Now let's add our muzzle flash. This will be fun. Put a 3D cursor there. And I'm going to be creating a plane. Rotate it like that. Now you may be wondering, how the hell is a plane going to look like a muzzle flash? Just wait, okay? Just wait. Extrude. Like that. Perfect. Add a edge loop. Maybe one over here. Grab the face at the outer end. Scale it down. Scale this down. You can see where this is going. Move this face forward. Bring it in and scale this a bit down because muzzle flares are usually, you've seen it probably 1,000 times. Okay, now let's subdivide this by pressing Control 2 or just adding a subdivision modifier. And then let's add a displace modifier and then press New. And then come down here to add texture and then set the type to clouds. There you go, that's our muzzle flash. Now you want to make sure you adjust the size. Let's add like a level 3 subdivision and then duplicate it and then move it down. Make this level 1 or level 2. Looks good. Now in here in the strength, make sure you don't go too wild. But just, yeah, make sure you adjust this to your liking. Let's create a new empty. And in our displace modifier, let's set the coordinates from local to object. And for the object, let's reference our empty. Might need to scale this down a bit. You can do it through the empty, or you can actually go in the texture and scale it down like that. Now let's set a keyframe for the rotation and location and move forward a bit. And I'm going to rotate my empty 360 degrees, maybe move it around. So set a keyframe for location and rotation again. And we also want to make this cyclic, so Shift E, make cyclic. Maybe it's a bit too much right now. Actually, I don't think it's enough, so let's rotate it in different direction as well. Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with that. And I move the muzzle flash a little bit away from the barrel of the gun. Because if you look at reference, the muzzle flash might not be exactly at the barrel. It depends. But, yeah, that looks about right. We go in our shader editor. Let's go to material preview for a second. And we add a, this is Blender 4.0. So the principled BSDF looks a bit different. Set the base color to black, no roughness, and yeah, set this to like a light orange yellow color. And we do have bloom enabled right now. So this looks okay, but it's, yeah, it doesn't look believable in my opinion. I think we could do one more thing for the empty to adjust our muzzle flash, and that's by scaling it up and down. And let's actually use a different method here. So let's set a keyframe for scale and then open up a new panel and go to the graph editor. Select your empty and open this drop down menu. Go to scale. Let's just scale it across all three. So let me just select one of my axes and go into modifiers. I'm going to add a noise modifier. And this graph shows like how frequent the noise is happening. If I scale it up, it's going to be less frequent. The strength, of course, decides how ridiculous it looks. I can do that. And the more random, the better, of course. And then instead of doing the same thing, I'm just going to hit this button. It's going to copy the modifier. And I'll go to the Y scale and hit the next button to paste. Do the same thing for the last one. And now this is our muzzle flash. Now it looks like it's going to extremes, and then at some point it looks like a blob. So you might want to bring down the strength on some of the other axes. All right, I'm satisfied with that. Let's remove this. Hide that empty. You don't need to see it. All right, that looks much better, but it still doesn't look how I want it to look. So let's add a noise texture here. I'm going to solo it for a second. Add a color ramp node. And I'm really going to crush the colors here. And if I press Ctrl D and add my texture coordinates, let's create a new empty. Let me just go with a sphere, doesn't really matter. And then select that new empty. I'm just going to animate the rotation for this one. So rotate, then rotate 360, rotate again, select the keyframes, press V, set it to vector, and then Shift E, make cyclic. Maybe a bit slower than that. There we go. And maybe scale the texture down like that. And then really just crush the values here. Let's make this a bit faster. All right, so we're going to be using the black and white map as our alpha matte. So let me connect the color node to the alpha node. Let's see what it looks like. So we don't have anything yet, but make sure you have screen space reflections enabled. And let's go into the texture settings, and under settings, set the blend mode to either alpha hashed or alpha blend. So I'm going to set it to alpha hashed. And now we could add more detail to the noise, but the way I like to do that is by duplicating the setup over here. I'm just going to connect this node to the vector as well. Let me solo it for a second. Move this out of the way. And let's add another color ramp and crush the values. And for this one, I'm going to set the scale to a higher value. And same with the detail. And also scale up the lacunarity. And then I'm going to be adding a mix RGB node and plug these two in. Set it to subtract. Maybe play around with the values a little. I actually didn't do this on the original example, but it should make for a much better muzzle flash. Okay, so right now it's pulsing in and out because our empty object right here is doing the same thing. So let's just add a bunch of keyframes. I'm gonna clear this cyclic. Select everything, make cyclic. And you could play around with this, add a whole bunch of different colors and shapes and however you want to style your muzzle flash. You know, if it was a laser gun, you could have a blue one. That's pretty cool. Or maybe like a green muzzle flash. I guess they would be using these guns in Slytherin, you know, because they're green. Bad joke. But yeah, you can style your muzzle flash the way you want it. Okay, cool. So right now there's no light being illuminated from the muzzle flash, despite the fact that it's a big glowing ball of fire. So to fake our illumination, what we're going to be doing is going to create a new point light. Actually, let's use an area light. I use a point light on the original, but area lights make more sense. Let's make an ellipse pointed towards our weapon, and let's set the power up really high. All right, let's make sure the colors are matching, and then we want to make sure the light is also flickering. So let me add a keyframe, put up our graph editor again, and I'm going to select the light, drop down this menu, select power, modifiers, add modifier, noise, and just do the whole thing again. That looks pretty convincing. And let's read the power here. I don't want it to go into the minus because then it chokes the light out for some reason. So let's go 150 maybe. Okay, that's good enough. Maybe set the scale even lower to 0.35. And what we can do is set the shadow bias to 0. Let's turn on our muzzle flash and rename it, of course. And right now, if I move the weapon, the light, the muzzle flash is not moving with it. So I'm going to select my muzzle flash and my light, and then shift click my armature, select the root, and Control P, bone. There you go. If I move this, we'll move everything else. And the cool part is the muzzle flash itself will actually change shape as I move the weapon. So you get that extra bit of randomness in there as well. Now we have the muzzle flash, but we don't have any shells coming out. So add a plane. Sure, it's angled the same way, like the chamber opening. And then we're gonna add a particle system, and for under render, set it as object, and the object itself should be our shell. There we go. Already there, see? Okay, scale it up first of all. So let's go to frame, first frame. We don't want any scale randomness because shells are, you know, supposed to be the same size. As far as I know, I'm not a gun owner, so I don't know. But I would assume they're the same size. Anyway, our plane, let's rename this to emitter. And right now we can see it, but I want this to be invisible. So in my object data, just turn this off. So the bullets are coming in this very bizarre way, and I believe there's too many coming out at once too. So just set it to a number that looks right, 300 maybe. And then we're going to turn on rotation. And let's see, rotate. So just play around with this. It could be object Z for you or object X. Really depends on what your model, how your model is oriented. The one that you're instancing, of course. Now, right now, the shells aren't rotating as they're falling out of the gun. Maybe this is a bit too big, by the way. Let's scale it down a touch. And under rotation, let's set it to dynamic. And that did absolutely nothing. Let's set it to dynamic and then also hit randomize phase. And just randomize in general, maybe. There we go. Perfect. And just like with the muzzle flash and the light, let's select our emitter, shift click the armature, select the root in pose mode, and Control P, bone. And if we just quickly create a backdrop here. Now select the backdrop and under physics set collision. Now watch the bullets make these funny shapes. So first of all, the bullets are disappearing right here because if we go back into the emitter, their lifetime is set to 50 frames. Well, let's just extend this to 250 so they're there for the whole duration of this animation. But they're making these funny, you know, they're hopping around and everything. So let's go to the backdrop actually. into the physics settings. And let's turn up the randomize and maybe turn up the stickiness a bit. Okay, so I feel like there's not enough velocity right now because the bullet shells are basically dropping down if I put the gun sideways. So under velocity, let's set it to 3 meters per second. So another last thing we could do is if it's still flying out too straight, we can turn up the randomize under the velocity in our emitter. And if you turn it up too much, it will fly out everywhere, but just keep it fairly low, but just enough for it to break that linear look, basically. All right, there we go. So if what I can do is I can create a camera, go my camera view. Under view, I can set camera to view. So now if I move the view, it will move the camera. And I can open a compositor quickly. So first of all, select this drop-down menu and set the compositor to camera or always. I'm going to set it to camera, and then I also want to disable the pass part 2, enable that to field, and there we go. In our compositor, I'm going to add a lens distortion. I'm going to enable jitter and then add a little bit of dispersion. Then add a glare node, and that's way too much, but maybe it's something you like. I'm just gonna keep it at streaks, but I'll set the streaks to 2 instead of 4 because I like the way it looks, and set the threshold up a little bit. And then I'm gonna add a color RGB curves, give it a little bit of contrast. We're going for cold colors here, but feel free to color grade your scene according to, you know, the mood of your scene. So it doesn't always have to be cold or warm. It just depends on what you want. Turn the green channel up a touch and the blue channel down. Actually, let's give it more blue, a bit more green, more red. And then if it's too much, you can add a hue saturation node. This is very similar to my After Effects workflow, by the way. And let's just turn the saturation down a touch. Add your sound effects. You're all ready. Move the weapon around. The lights are updating. The shells are flying, and we have a nice big muzzle flash. You know what? Actually, the default colors look way better than what I just did with it. So in a way, I kind of ruined the scene by adding color to it, right? Okay, never mind. I do like the green color. Okay, I cannot make up my mind about this. Doesn't matter. Whether you like the blue and red or the green tinge on this. It's up to you. Alright guys, that was it for the tutorial. If you like this video, please hit a like button and subscribe with the bell notification and all of that. Next week, I'll be uploading another tutorial or showcase video. I'll be uploading every week, and I'll see you in the next video.